Welcome to the Talking Free podcast. As the girl who has always been told she talks too much, can speak with a mouthful of marbles underwater, and can sell ice to Eskimos, I have found the perfect platform to have my say, freely. I am here to share with real people, having raw conversations about authentic stories. It is a place where you can feel safe discussing anything and everything. These stories will make you laugh, cry, debate, wonder, intrigue, and get curious about life as you talk free with Trudy Marie. Please note that the following podcast may contain discussions or topics that could be triggering or distressing for some listeners. I aim to provide informative and supportive content, but understand that certain themes may evoke strong emotions or memories. If you find yourself feeling overwhelmed or in need of support while listening, I encourage you to pause the podcast and take a break. Remember that it is okay to prioritise your well-being and seek assistance from trained professionals. There is no shame in this. In fact, it is the first brave step to healing. If you require immediate support, please consider reaching out to Lifeline on 13 11 14 or a crisis intervention service in your area. Thank you for listening, and please take care of yourself as you engage with the content of this podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Talking Free podcast, and today I am privileged to have my first male guest, Andy Fermo, on. And Andy is an Australian Defence Force veteran, and he's also the founder of his company, Invisible Injuries. And that's how I actually came to meet Andy, is I was introduced to Invisible Injuries by somebody else. So welcome, Andy.
Oh, thanks for having me, Trudy. It's a real privilege to have been invited onto your podcast, as well as be the first male to for you to interview on the podcast.
Yeah, and I'm so excited that you're here, given that it's about a year since we did our podcast together after I finished the bib track. So we've come a long way in a year.
Oh, absolutely. You know, and before hitting record, it was I did mention for the audience out there is that Trudy, when she came onto the Invisible Injuries podcast, she'd mentioned that, you know, she wanted to start a podcast, and here we are a year later, and she's done what she said she was going to do, which was really exciting to be able to hear that, you know, is to take action after you've vocalized the intent.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I have to admit, it's all about honoring your word and following through on what you say you're going to do. So I'm glad I've done it as well, because otherwise we wouldn't be here today. But to start with your story, Andy, I know that you obviously were a member of the ADF. So could you give us a brief overview? And given that my listeners are predominantly female, could you kind of make it in as layman's terms as possible?
Okay, yes, I've had 14 years to be able to distill it back into civvy speak or into more layman's terms. I served 10 years in the Australian Army. I started off as a signaller in electronic warfare, and that job entailed me to basically I was a glorified eavesdropper, where I would intercept enemy communications, get a gist of the conversation of what their intent was. And then I'd have specialist equipment along with my team to be able to triangulate or geolocate a source of a communication signal. So we were the ears of a intelligence picture within the military. We would get this intelligence picture, mix it in with the guys who were the eyes and the analysts, and then we'd put a package together and report it to upper management or the commander. And when we reported to the commander, you know, what was happening on the ground, he would then move his chess pieces on the board in accordance with a much more informed decision based on what was happening. Eyes, ears, sounds, and all those things, and then get the guys to come in, because really at the end of the day, it was also the preservation of life, and you're achieving the mission, but also making it in a way is not putting them in danger if you knew about some stuff. So that's what I did as an EW operator. But I also loved doing the army stuff, the army stuff. That was the sneaky peeky side, but I also had an adventurous side, which I loved man packing. I loved the heavy stuff. I loved the weapons and the big bangs and jumping out of planes. And we got to do that before I even got qualified with, our capability, working with other organizations. So we were collaborating with other organizations that needed us to plug in. And, we started jumping out of planes. Fast forwarding through half of that career, which was really exciting. It was a really busy operational tempo at that time because it was the sort of early 2000s till sort of, the East Timor, Iraq, Afghanistan, those campaigns, as well as the peacekeeping missions in the Solomon Islands. There was like lots of AFP that were there and like Christmas, all those other Papua New Guinea, those operations were there. But it wasn't until 2006 I got posted to 2 Commando. I was 4 RAR then, and they were a special forces unit. I didn't really know too much about the special forces unit, except I knew that they were elite within the organization, just like the TRG or those other organizations are in the police force. Now, I was just mesmerized when I saw the guys jumping out of planes and the helicopters. And this was for that first gig at the Commonwealth Games. So we were there, we were working with first responders. It was the first time I had a taste of having that big picture. This is more than just the military coming in. There was first responders, there was paramedics, and these other larger organizations for such a big event like the Commonwealth Games to come in. And I was just hooked, into that was what I wanted to do. So as a new capability with our role plugging in and sort of collaborating, I wanted to be able to set us an example and be accepted by the parent company, so to speak, that we had a right to be there, and we also needed to earn our place as well. So I put my hand up to become, to take the test. And I got through the test and then the subsequent selection process. However, I also elected to remain within my trade as the primary role, right? So I was qualified as a commando. However, I wanted to be able to also do my primary role, which is why we were there, and mix them in. And then I still had the best of both worlds to be able to go and bang in on the job as an extra body when they needed to. And they needed to do that quite a lot when I got to do the job, so for real in inverted commas, in a warlike situation in Afghanistan. So I did 2 tours post the Commonwealth Games, got qualified as a team leader, and got to do the job for real, which was really, really satisfying because it was, the job, they called us a force multiplier. So it was a small footprint, only a couple of small dudes, like a couple of dudes that would have a massive effect because, that sort of information, where information is key in a battle space or from in the police force, you need to have that information, credible information, to be able to do the next step. Without any evidence, you ain't got shit. You know what I mean? So that's the thing is but on the second tour, I was exposed to 3 really traumatic incidences that affected me quite a lot. But, I must say, if I just quickly backtrack a moment, is that I got to do the job with some amazing people, all at the top of their game. And I got to do it with a great leadership of and it was a great organization to be able to do that. The leadership and my teammates and the boys, because I say the boys because it was a frontline unit, right? So it wasn't really that co-ed, but we did have some females there that would work with us. But when came to the push comes to shove, we were out there war fighting, and that's what our role was.
I just want to say, firstly, thank you for your service and for your dedication and what you've given to your country. Because I think so often we take the ADF for granted of what they actually do for us, whether it's in peacekeeping times or warkeeping times. You've obviously said how during a peacekeeping time you were helping out with the Commonwealth Games, but then you've obviously done 2 tours. And for my listeners, how long is a tour?
Yes, with the Special Forces, the tour can go sort of from 3 to 4 months. But there's no leave in between. So that was for the main body of people. And then, so there's no leave. In regular army, you get what they call rockall, which is you get to go home for a couple of weeks or to a destination of your choosing to decompress mid-tour, and that's usually a 6-month tour. Ours was, 4 months, depending on where you'd go. But as a team leader and the particular missions the particular rotations I went on, as the team leader, we needed to be there a little bit beforehand and afterwards as well for our handovers to our counterparts. So I was there at least 3 weeks before the main body would come. I would have been out there sort of for about that sort of 5.5 month mark.
Okay, and that's a really key aspect in what you're about to talk about, which is something we spoke about off camera that you said was the trauma triangle. And I believe that happened at the beginning of one of your tours, and then you had to obviously complete your tour. So I just want to provide that overall landscape for what you're about to speak into.
Yes, on our second tour, it was SOTG 9, 2009. I was a team leader again, and we were going out for our first mission, which was a month-long mission. It was, what I can say about it was an out-of-area ops, so we were actually supporting some other key elements in the Badlands. Like the area was really high tempo, high dangerous environment, and we were there in support. After we left, all this happened within the sort of first 9 to 10 days of that month-long tour. They were all IED incidences, so roadside bombs, or improvised explosive devices. These 3 traumatic incidences happened in close succession to each other. And for the people, especially the person that paid the ultimate sacrifice, I need to be able to at least share their names and what happened. So without going into too much detail to sort of rip open any wounds in your audience, our first casualty was Sergeant Brett Till, and he was dismantling a cluster of roadside bombs. And unfortunately, one of those clusters blew up while he was doing the job, making safe. And he paid the ultimate sacrifice in front of everyone. So that was real sort of a big blow to, everyone was, yep, hey, we're all pumped for the job. And that was like the reality check. Within a few days of our tour, first mission, and we had a casualty. You had it killed in action. Someone paid the ultimate sacrifice. So that was a big blow. And when something like that happens, it really affects the morale within the unit, or whoever you're out with. However, we were so focused on being on the job that you just have to get that trauma and then pack it aside, and I must give. And so for these 3 incidences, without going into I'll preface, Trudy, the men who helped when these incidences happened was just the training and the evacuation and the procedures were just second to none. And there was a lot of stuff there, that happened. A lot of these incidences were followed on with big battles that I must really acknowledge the men that we had to do our job and still provide the care. So Sergeant Brett Till passed away. And then a couple of days later, our Bushmaster, the vehicle that I was in, which was like a command vehicle, ran over a roadside bomb as well, which blew some critical. It basically was a mobility kill for the vehicle. It blew the engine out of the block and the tires off. And this is essentially a tank with wheels, a big armored vehicle. And yeah, the guys inside, there was mass casualties, traumatic brain injuries from such a big percussion wave and smashing in. I was fortunate enough to not get a traumatic brain injury, even though there was still some significant damage caused by the blast in terms of physical injuries as well as that percussion. But I didn't get that big head bang because I was on the gun at the time in the turret. So I was like, what prevented me from becoming a human cannonball was me holding onto the weapon and then to the side of the manhole. So that's where the shoulders and the back and everything like that happened. And again, heavy battles, and we had to do our job. And so this is where I had to rely on the teamwork and the training of my team to be able to do the job while we were, fixing up the casualties for evacuation under fire. And so that was heavy going. And again, putting the trauma to the side and this rolling on, it was a hard one, because we were still on the way to the area of operations. And then a few days later, when we were actually in the area of operations, some heavy fighting. Private Damien Tomlinson, their vehicle, ran over another roadside bomb where he lost his legs, and the men that helped him out for the Casevac were just, that there should have been medals for gallantry, at least, by the actions, which obviously there's a lot of these things that happen during wartime, but not everything gets reported, or nor that you're chasing those accolades. That's all stuff for afterwards. But the men that did those jobs, just, I have so much respect for that brotherhood of fellas that, did that job at the time. And so that trauma triangle at the start of the tour was the start of, some lots of heavy battles and a lot of many traumas that sort of, that you kind of compound over time, much like, when you're going out on the job, you're going in the police force, you're going out to your war zone every day, whether it's in a domestic setting, and lots of incidences that accumulate over time have that sort of more complex trauma effect on the autoimmune system, on the nervous system. So when I got home, everything started to really unravel. I was avoiding, but I was also keeping busy with work. I didn't take leave, and that was a bit more detrimental as well, because I just didn't have any time to compress. I was just kept on working. It all unraveled when I was at I was furniture shopping with my wife when I got back, and I heard the news that 3 of the fellas and many more mass casualties, they died in a hard helicopter landing. And I heard about this at the same time that the public was hearing about it, because of that radio silence of an incident that's happened overseas. So that's when I broke down, and the sort of beginning of the end of my career started to happen.
Yeah, look, again, I want to say, thank you for your service, because I think this is the one thing that as civilians at home, we don't fully get the picture of what you guys are actually doing on the front line, however that looks. And what's there for me right now is the fact that you talk about that triangle of the first incident, you had to watch a sergeant be killed. And then the second incident, you yourself were injured along with a bunch of others. And then you only had to, a couple of days later, watch another private lose his legs. And any single one of those incidences can be such a traumatic thing. But to have all 3 compound, and like you mentioned, it becomes this complex post-traumatic stress that most people think it's just one big incident that leads to it, but you've not just had one, you've had 3. And then it's not until, like you said, you compartmentalize it so you still do your job, which is something I relate to in the police force. It's like you have to put things aside to get the job done. And then coming home and to be shopping with your wife for something so normal like furniture, and to hear something that just literally sets off that all those filing cabinets all just start to I just look at it somebody opens all the drawers of a filing cabinet and it comes tumbling down. And I think for you...
But yes, it did, Trudy, and thanks for acknowledging that. And something that sort of come up in mind just in this conversation that I haven't had much opportunity to also share.
That's what happened in that situation.
Is this didn't happen till very much further down the track, is my particular role as an electronic warfare operator. One of the things was to triangulate. So I felt I had a lot of, after those incidences and during that time, part of our job was to geolocate potential sites where IEDs, because the threat was so big. Now, it wasn't until I was looking at these bits that a lot of the time, in the reporting, there could be potential locations, and you think, okay, I'm dotting these out as potential locations. So I carried a lot of guilt around, could that have been me stopping this incident if I would have, it was reported, but sometimes you carry that sort of shame and guilt, because you think that, I could have prevented it if only. Those things happen for a long time, which is right post the fact and post service. They go, well, actually, no, I couldn't have controlled that at the time, but it still doesn't mean that shame and guilt doesn't hang around with you for a long time. And it took a large amount of time and a lot of therapy to sort of bring that up and sort of acknowledge those those things.
But that's amazing awareness to have, in the fact that you talked about at the beginning that you had this dual role, that you could be out there on the front line, but you also had this intelligence capability. And yes, all those incidences happened on the front line, but for you to actually stand back and go, hold on a second, the reason we were on the front line is because of the intelligence, and then to actually deal with that separately so that you are able to receive the help and the therapy that you needed for those parts. Because I think that's what happens in PTS, is that so many people cannot actually get to the bottom line or the very root cause of that trauma. And that obviously played a significant part in what you experienced. So for you to be able to recognize that, acknowledge that, and then get the help for it, like, kudos to you for having the courage and the strength to be able to acknowledge that and work through it.
It took a long time to really get in, and that comes under the moral injury, Trudy, which is also part of, post-traumatic stress. There's those moral conflicts as well, but it's wartime and you've got to be able to do it. I think the hard part, though, when everything fell apart for me, was I still wanted to do the job. It was my job. That was what I dedicated. I still at least had another 5 years at least. Yes, I was thinking about an exit down the track, but it had to be on my terms. And where would I go? Where would I shuffle? And so when all that happened is I actually self-medicated and did my own, I'd go and see a psych in my own time, because I didn't want anyone, even the medical profession within the organization, to know what I was going through, because I didn't want to be seen or deemed a liability. And that was part of my downfall as well, was going and seeking out my own help, because I didn't want to. We were so operationally focused that these things didn't happen. So I'm like, yeah, soon I've got this stuff going on. And I actually held a top secret clearance. So I had a very high security clearance with all the bloody letters that you could poke a stick at. And with that, when I was a little bit too honest, to be honest with you, I was a little bit too honest when a review came out that sort of reviewed that. And I'm not blaming anyone, but I have a really big suspicion there that it was really whoever was conducting that report at the time really only saw what I'd mentioned, and people who were subsequently reading it is what they saw on paper. So they just see, okay, such and such has reported this is what's happened, but no questions actually got asked about what was the mechanism of these things happening. And a lot of that comes down to policy, which is totally outside the scope of this. But, a lot of those undoings sort of came down to, okay, well, hold on a second. This is what you're saying, and it's contraindicating what you're saying with how I'm being treated now. And so when I lost the clearance, that was the catalyst for one, to make my mental health go down, because I'd lost purpose and I just couldn't do my job at all, because I was in a high security part of the organization and I couldn't even go into the office. So I ended up in a warehouse, and those guys do a great job, but it wasn't my job. And I was doing stuff within this warehouse that was the job that they didn't want to do. It's like give them something, at least then that way, I probably would have been better painting off rocks, because then I could have just got into my head or something like that, but that was the downfall and, the start of really having to deal with my trauma and my own mental health once I was discharged medically.
Yeah, and I think that does play into, and I can relate that back to like the police force, is the fact that you do have this purpose and you don't want to seem a liability and you don't want to seem like you can't handle the job. And I myself did that. I did that for multiple months leading up to me having my collapse at work. You go through this whole process of having this job and having this clearance and having like a purpose in life. And when all that's taken away, what are you left with? It's not just the fact that you don't have a purpose. It's like your whole identity has been stripped away from you. And who are you now?
Yeah, absolutely. And so if we could, put a bit of tech around this to, try and distill that into a simple term, right? It's like when you go to eject a hard drive from your USB, right? Sometimes some other programs using this, if you disconnect it now and just rip the cord out, you might suffer some damage. And then I've done it before. I've just ripped it out because I don't have any time to do the proper shutdown procedure, so to speak. And it isn't until you go to use it again, or that you really need it, that it says, oh, okay, this stuff's corrupt, or this is not working now. So, and I think having that analogy of being disconnected from what your purpose is in doing, it really is a big kick in the guts, though, and really exacerbates the problem. And then to add to that, Trudy, was the bit where I was originally, I had to fight for the questions to be asked to have gone, well, was this with the circumstances of the discharge more towards a medical line, because I was administratively discharged before, my advocate was like, oh, hold on a second, this should be a medical discharge. It was easier under that path at the time for whoever, was running the show in that discharge process it was a big fight to really have my name cleared in that sort of sense, where it wasn't just from a hero to zero. It was more, okay, there were circumstances here that were overlooked. And now, yes, this member's out, and we can acknowledge that it was attributable to a medical grounds, which was a relief then, because then a lot of we talked about guilt and shame before. And, it's like, well, people, well, why did you get out? Or, that sounds like a dishonorable discharge, because they see that on movies and they see this, and you go, well, it was an admin discharge, or this. A dishonorable discharge is a very, very strong word, especially for someone who has been in the military or as a first responder, is to have been discredited and have that honorable name taken away. It's a real, it's like, man, I've sorry about the language, but I've got to, I did this job overseas because that's what I was trained to do. And this was the mission. But now to say that you would dishonorably discharge and you don't have any honor because of something that's happened, it compounds to that sense of loss and grief.
100%. And I totally get it from even what I've been through, but given what you've been through, and to the honour that comes with working in a military uniform, and to have that almost go against you and just credit everything you've done in your career, I can understand that was probably the beginning of the end and of your career, but then also the beginning of your whole trauma situation, which you call your broken house period, and that led to something so positive in invisible injury. So tell us about that time.
Yeah, so broken house, fast forwarding to a couple of years, I attribute being able to navigate services and the basics to my first advocate. He was really pivotal in teaching me how to navigate to find these services, especially when I wasn't in a good spot. He said, Andy, shut the fuck up. Listen to what I have to say. You might not need it now, or you might not acknowledge it now, but you will down the track. So just listen, shut up, listen, take it in. And so he taught me how to navigate my way around that. But fast forwarding, I did all the trauma, the EMDR, all the things that you could poke a stick at with that initial trauma that we're talking about. Also, getting my wife, or now, my now wife, but my girlfriend then on board to be there in support of how she could best support me, and have some agreements and affirmations that if she said something to me like, this is like your safe word, to me, it's like, oh, actually, I'm acting like a bloody pork chop now. I need to go and do this, because then that was that pre-agreed, hey, you might not see this at this time. I'm telling you now, this is what's happening because I'm looking at it from a different view. I'm like, sort of that's a pattern break. I need to go and employ some self-care techniques. Now, Broken House came through when we moved from Sydney or the Central Coast up to Noosa, and a series, we'd secured a home, but we hadn't fully secured a home. And a series of circumstances that were unforeseen over the course of a year sort of snowballed down. So we were trying to do these things to secure this home. And we call it broken houses because it was an 120-year-old Queenslander, needed a lot of work. And there was a lot of work that we were doing to it. But in the end, while we were trying to do these things, the focus was so much that on getting that job done, that part of it also led to me neglecting or not just putting aside my self-care plan. which, I knew how to do. But when I was so tunnel focused, I put all that aside. And at the end of the year, yes, there was, behind a smiling face, I was bloody, struggling inside. And it all culminated when we couldn't secure what we were trying to do, and we lost that house, and we ended up camping in a place in the hinterland, in the Noosa hinterland, called Kilkeven. And so we wrapped it up at the time for, with the kids. Oh, we're going to go for our camping holiday. But when you're not doing that because it's as much as choice, we were there for like 6 weeks and trying to figure out what we were going to do. By the time we got there, all of our stuff was already packed and sort of in the little bits. So there was no home to really go back to. It was just some packed boxes that we needed to uplift. And that was the sort of start of and birthing of Invisible Injuries, Trudy. While we were there, I was at my lowest point. There was some suicidal ideologies, which fortunately for me were only those fleeting thoughts. However, those thoughts had come there. Obviously the black dog can affect people in many ways, but our situation was that we were homeless. Mental health and sort of self-worth were really at a bit of an all-time low. And so I felt I was broken. And so my wife said, oh, well, let's just run away. And I said, well, I'm a bloody fighter. And that's not what I'm all about. And then she said, well, you know how to navigate your way through to find services. So why don't we document that, like a recovery journey? Why don't we document that? And why don't we see what other people are doing as well, by sharing their stories and then seeing what they can sort of share so that other people don't, they can take what they need from it and implement it in their own program, whatever that looks like for them. And then so the last part of that then was to also then go around and do a PTSD or mental health awareness campaign, see what was really going on. So there was at that particular time, and this is all the same time that COVID was happening as well, or just prior, there was big calls for the Suicidal Royal Commission into suicide in the military. So there was all these things and people in the top end of town making these decisions, but not really seeing where it was. And so part of that journey was to go, well, let's do this tour. I was a soldier, not at this thing. And I'm more about seeing boots on the ground. So let's talk to people and boots on the ground. And so that's what we did amidst COVID and sort of some small fundraising efforts. And we did get a larger one, thanks to Young Veterans, which I've got to really credit them for at the time, to go, okay, this is what they're doing. And there was a very generous donation from them to help enable us to do what we needed to do at that time. We got to go to do our tour around Australia within the restrictions for going to, different locations. The border restrictions were quite tight at that time. So we did as much as we could with the time that we had and within what was happening in the that landscape at the time, which was COVID. So we did all of that shoestring budget during COVID.
And is that how you come to end up in Perth?
Oh, my wife and I are from Perth originally. We'd been on the East Coast for the majority of our adult lives. I think it was like 25 years or something like that. And during COVID, my parents and Claire's parents, mum was living here as well. She'd moved over here from Brizzy. So that's one, our immediate support network was moved, to all being in Perth. And it got so expensive being over there. Coming back home to WA, we didn't think we would, but I think the universe might have been giving us these signals because we started having some vehicle troubles. It was around Christmas time again, where everyone was on leave. So we decided to stay here for the Christmas and visit family. And, that was that sort of decision where we're like, you know what, I think the opportunities, it feels right to resettle here, be closer to immediate support, be there as, I'm the oldest in the family. So my parents are getting a little bit older now. Culturally, it's like, I want to be able to be here for them, as well as let's see what it's like for the opportunity to be able to create something over here, where it was getting so expensive on the East Coast. And we managed to head down bum up for a year to save for a house. And we said we were going to save it. We vocalized it, and it was head down bum up to save and work our asses off. And we ended up getting a house as well. And then so everything that we said that we've done since we've come here has come to fruition, which is, sort of, I've really got to acknowledge that now, and we're really grateful for that, because the opportunities since moving back here and having the immediate support of friends and family and reconnecting, and then also setting up a self-care plan has been able to allow us to then do the stuff that we're doing with invisible injuries.
Yeah, and I think that's amazing. And I just also want to acknowledge your wife and the partners of all wives of military personnel, because it's a huge thing to be like supporting you in that role and what you have to do and all the crap that comes with it. And people have the choice. They can either stick around and be that support network, or they can run. And so the fact that she actually supported you 100% and gave you the idea of like, let's do something with this and let's give a voice not just to you, but to every other veteran that has got PTS issues. I just think that's incredible in how Invisible Injuries was started. And that also leads me into the next part of you now setting up here in Perth, and you flipped the script as you described it to how your family dynamics run now and what it looks like post being a part of ADF.
Yeah, I think that, so when we moved here, when I met my wife, she was, a budding actress. So she was in finance, and that's where we met in Sydney. So she was in hedge funds of all things, but she was actually an actress. She'd been accepted into NIDA, which is the National Institute of Dramatic Arts, based in Sydney. And at that time, it just really wasn't what she was kind of looking for and hoping to have in that acting industry as an actress. So she just continued doing what she was doing with the work in the corporate field, but sort of coming out then and then sort of also being in support of me doing some stuff. We moved to highly populated regional towns. And so the dream of having to be able to go in is small theatre, stuff like that. She knew that she wanted to do it, but, obviously when you go to these highly populated regional towns, there's two types of people that live there. It's the rich retirees that have lots of time and lots of money to be able to do what it is. Or if you're there as a young family, and this goes with so many, is that you have to have several different hustles, so to speak, to make things work to get by. So it comes down to this thing where she was supporting me doing our thing. I was still also dealing with my own stuff. And we did have some successful work. We had purpose, but the purpose that you're doing, you're making work and doing stuff to just live, right? You're not pursuing what it is that you want to do. And so when we moved here, there was an opportunity for her to be able to do some acting. And these opportunities came up where now she's really making a big difference with this company, experiential training. And a lot of that has to go out, she has to fly out to the mines and that. So we had this conversation around, well, what's the family dynamic doing? So Andy, you're always doing this stuff, right? So I do lots of different things in my work now to create work that is the sum of lots of things. I'm not one of these guys now that can go to a 9-to-5 normal job, for my mental health and how we live our lifestyle. But she had this opportunity to be able to pursue her passion and dreams. And so I just said to her, look, who am I to stop you if this opportunity is here now to go and chase that? I'm doing what I'm doing now. Yes, so it's a bit hard. Well, what's this sort of stay-at-home dad? Well, it's not like the full stay-at-home dad, but there's other roles within a family unit that had been traditionally in traditional thinking that the woman does this, right? Well, and so I said, look, I'm happy to be able to do that. I know, there's many, many men in our circle of friends that have different things, and the work's the work. So the way that I said that we discussed it was, okay, yeah, if you go and do that and you're away, then there might be these other bits. I could pick up that sort of slack there. I call it the daddy daycare, right? So we got to put some fun on it. There's a film about it, and it's a bit of a different role. But when you actually talk to other males that are out of that role, or that's, I'm just going to go to where my hive is at work, it's really blokey and, do this. And you go, well, that's great. I can do that too. And I did that as part of the work when we got back here. But if she was away, I'm like, well, if you've got to do these things for your work, a little bit of sacrifice, but also just knowing that there's peace of mind that you're not going to feel guilty by doing and pursuing your career, and then making sure that, we've got 2 kids. So then they're sorted out. And luckily now they're starting to become that age where they're a little bit more self-sufficient, but it takes that time and someone there to be able to go in. And for me, I think that there's real strength in having a positive male role model, especially when there's so many broken families out there that don't have that male role model for the kids. I think that that's a big one. And a lot of the men that I've spoken to in that sort of flip the script that we did earlier is yes, is going, well, look, it doesn't make me less manly by being able to pick up the slack to be able to do some stuff. In fact, it's like, okay, well, I need to be actually more active as a man to go, well, these are these other things that I can do. And I'll backtrack it a little bit to, recruit school. When we were going through Kapuga, they taught us how to iron so you can iron your polyester uniforms. They taught us how to bloody fold the blankets up in so that your bed's made with hospital corners. All that stuff, all the domestic stuff, right, is taught to you there. How to fold your clothes is a lesson. How to bloody roll up your socks and make the smiley face is another lesson. So when blokes go, oh, this is you might have seen the magical carpet. It's a thing on social, right? So all these clothes or dirty things would go onto the table, right? And then all of a sudden the bloke puts it on the table, and then he comes back the next day and goes, look, it's a magical thing. Those things have disappeared. Right? And the partner's like, no, mate, that's me putting them away. No, it's this magical thing. I put the stuff there and it just magically goes away. And so I think that's the analogy that I'm trying to make with it now is that, it doesn't magically go away. Someone actually has to do that work in the background. I think as a male, lots of males, you can get comfortable in a relationship going, oh, these are tasks that need to be done. You've mentioned it before, like, as a single parent trying to bring up, you don't have any choice but to do all of those. So if I'm in a relationship and my wife's going to be, we've got an agreement to do that, I'm happy to be able to, support her in chasing those dreams, and then still be able to do the stuff and still feel like I've got purpose, which I do now with the charity and the DJing and all the stuff that we're going. But I just need to do a couple of other extra tasks, which is just, even if it's unpaid work and doing my job as a dad and a father and a family man, they need to be done. So the work's the work, Trudy. Whether it's paid or not.
It is. And I still find it interesting that in the 21st century, we're having this conversation where it's equality. And yet there are so many, there's FIFO dads out there, and there's people who are first responders who have to work shift work. And there's the people who still work military and work long periods, male and female, where, the females in the military going on tours for anywhere between 3 to 9 months. And who's to say that as part of the family dynamic that you can't work together? And I know my husband's ex-military, he's a first responder now, and he has that same background that you do. He knows how to wash, he knows how to cook, he knows how to make the bed and all that kind of stuff, because it's kind of ingrained into you. And I think we just live in this world where even though the dynamics have changed, it's still almost this, I want to say like 1950s Stepford wife-ish, where there's got these gender roles. And I don't think that that's a thing in the current times.
Yeah, that's a big one. And I think as well, Trudy, when you got the FIFO, or that you're away on a mission, or you're away on secondment to another thing, like as a first responder, whether you're a male or a female, you've got to go. If you've got to go, you've got to go away, right? And someone's staying at home to man the fort. And that's always the thing. Someone needs to stay here to man the fort. Doesn't really, that saying isn't just, is there something in the contract that says it has to be a bloke or a chick? And sorry about the language, but this comes out because this is the way that I talk. And I think, I grew up in a when FIFO started. So FIFO used to be fully brutal then. And for a long time, I had some hang-ups about that. And that's only really come to light now when I've had these other things to deal with, because what I find is that when someone goes away as well, whoever's holding the fort gets a routine with what's happening in life. And the other person comes back, whether it's a male or female, right? Or, comes back going, oh, I feel a little bit guilty. I'm going to do my duties here and start to you're messing up the chi, man, because you feel guilty and you think that you're doing the right thing by being able to sort of go, okay, this is how it's done when I'm here. But it doesn't actually, it's not really productive to make it happen within that state. So we've got this deal now where it's like, okay, now you're rolling with it. You've got it. I'll just supplement where it is. And there's these other bits where it's like, when I'm here, I'd like to go and pick up the kid and I'm going to go to the door. Yeah, that's fine. Usually I'll make it so that my kid walks halfway home or whatever. and then I will have a meeting spot, and that, takes care of a lot of other troubles. It's those are the little things, as well as going, well, look, if this role is going to be done as well, is that you got to also let go of these other things of feeling that you need to be able to do it because I've got this, I'm capable. And that's the thing, I think. And lots of blokes feel that they go, oh, I'm not capable to do this. Well, mate, it's spending time with your kid. If you're talking about, oh, I'm always at work. And you spoke about that earlier on. Oh, I'm going to avoid going home because I feel that at work, if I'm working, then I'm working. Well, I don't need to actually deal with this other stuff that might happen in everyday life, which is one of those things.
Yeah. And I think that that's where like your business and your podcast of Invisible Injuries is, while it started off as being this beautiful place to deal with what the Australian Defence Force personnel are dealing with, it's become over time a place where first responders can go. And I think it's going to evolve further again as this whole issue around mental health and wellness and looking after your own personal well-being, that it will spread into the FIFO life and also just general everyday life. Because I think despite being the 21st century, there is still this gender divide and there is still these traditional norms about who's supposed to do what. And whether it's the male or whether it's the female, we all get burnt out at some stage. And until we start looking after ourselves, like my biggest thing is that you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to fill your own cup first. And if we're not looking after ourselves and then looking after each other, how can then that have a ripple effect out into the world? And we wonder why the world is fucked as it is at the moment.
But, look, that's the thing, Trudy, the stuff that happened with invisible injuries. But now the purpose that I've got is to be able to create that content and to be able to help out as a mental health ambassador, but also teach stuff in the wellness and, mental health and wellbeing space. And that's now also moving towards that corporate side, preventive measures that we spoke about. And because I think mental health is should be spoken to by everyone, and that's a big one. And although our focus is primarily on our target and key audience, first responders, immediate support, and veterans experiencing post-traumatic stress, mental health does affect people from all walks of life. So I think, if there was something that has a similarity to a military or first responder, some of the things that might happen where it's high stress, things of, like what you mentioned, burnout, if we can help with these tools and do that's part of what, that gives me purpose in doing what we're doing, without trying to go, I can help everyone in the world, because you just can't as a small organization with the finite resources. It's I just take it now to how we did it in the military is what they call a force multiplier, is a small amount of people making a larger impact. And if we can impact the people that we have these communications with, or we might not even meet them through, like, say, social media, if it saves lives, or if it puts someone in a better space to be able to then go and seek help, whatever that might look like for them, I think that's a big win. Part of that sometimes is when you get these random messages. It's like, oh, some days when you think, oh, am I having any effect, a positive effect? And you get this random messages like, I listened to Trudy's podcast and I didn't know that she walked 1,000 kilometers and she's doing this. And it has had a big effect. Last year, that podcast episode had, but the listenership on that one was just through the roof in regards to how many people connected with it, especially women that were from first responder and veteran communities, as well as the women that are as immediate support. So in the different roles, so many. And I think that by having those things to share it is a platform to do so is massive.
Oh, that makes my heart happy to think that I have made a difference in your podcast community. But I think that even that's what we have in common in me starting my podcast, is giving people a voice to share their stories. Because I say, even at the beginning of my podcast, is that we may not walk in the same shoes, but we walk along the same path, however that looks. And we do have things in common across humanity, that we're not alone in this journey. And I think Invisible Injuries does that so beautifully in how it shares veteran stories, so that you're not alone, but then it gives you these tools on how to live your life. And for me, that's what's important in all of this, is that we stick together, we support one another, we raise each other up, and we make a difference where like you said, it might be one listener, but that has a ripple effect out into their community. And if it makes a difference in their life, because let's be real, when mental health gets to its worst and there is that suicide ideation that follows through, that has a dramatic, devastating ripple effect. And if we can change that to be a positive, then everyone benefits from that.
Totally, Trudy. Sort of, I just came up with this analogy as you were sort of saying that and listening to what you were saying, is that you walk the Bibbulmun track, 1,000 kilometers, right? And you have a pack, you have your stuff, right? But if we talk about walking along that sort of on that footpath, I'm not walking in the same shoes, but if I'm walking in that sort of same direction, you have a pack. Everyone packs their pack differently. You have stuff to cook. Everyone's got a different cooking setup. Everyone's got a different camping setup. How you like to do things is slightly different. But even though there's all these little differences, that's customization, right? With what you feel is going there, but you're on the track, you're moving forward, you're walking that path. So that sort of has that analogy along that line there, there's self-discovery, there's the sharing of what works best for you. And then you might see a bloody traveler and they go, oh, I like that setup that Trudy had. What's that? And then implement that bit in their setup, whatever. So I think that that's a nice, to put it to the Bibbulmun adventure, what we're talking about really has that effect, whether, you're in a first responder or a military or immediate support. That path is very similar with very similar things that come up.
100%. And I love that analogy because I know that even listening to like your podcast, because it's obviously a lot older and it's been around for a long time and you've got so many different diverse stories on there, is that I do that when I listen to your episodes, is I take what I need from each of those episodes and apply it to my own life, even if it's only being grateful, because you can sometimes get caught up in your own head about how life is so tough and hard and negative and whatever. But the minute you just stop and be grateful for one thing and go, you know what? It doesn't matter in the big scheme of the universe and life. It really doesn't matter. And then that's how you take the next step forward, is that you just stop, be grateful for what you have right now, and then just take the next step forward.
Well, that's right, Trudy. And and that sort of reminded me as well with a recent conversation that I had, and his episode's coming up. He's an ex-NT police and Vic Pol veteran, right? It's ex-first responder. And he just said something to me about, when he was going through his mental health journey and recovery, that for a long time, he felt so shit for so long that he felt guilty if he was to feel any other emotions. But there's other emotions in that gamut. And you mentioned that before. It's like, well, actually, that doesn't define you now, even though you felt like this. So just quickly, he went out with his mates he hadn't seen for a long time, had the great day. And then afterwards, went back and sort of did a bit of self-harm because he felt so guilty that he had these positive emotions that he said, well, you're not deserving of these emotions. You're not deserving of these. And it's like, well, no, yes, you actually are deserving of these bits and pieces. You're actually deserving to be happy and these other positive thoughts. So even if you're not in the best mental health state at that time, there's ways to be able to improve that situation. And it doesn't have to define that because you've had the growth to move past being those feelings. Yes, they're always going to be there and they're going to be more prevalent coming up, but it doesn't mean that you're never going to allow yourself to feel in a positive way again, or be happy, or allow yourself to have some wins or be grateful. I think that's a big one.
Yeah. Thank you so much for what you have shared today and brought to the table. Like, I have loved every minute of this conversation, and I really think that so many different aspects of my listenership will actually benefit as well. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much. And I must say, if I can just use this time, Trudy, is to thank you, because you've got your primary audience is women, and, being empowered and being independent, and there's nothing wrong with is a great thing. I think that's a great quality for me personally to be able to, is to be your own person and still have those other duties that you have. But if you're going to chase your dreams, then chase your dreams or be empowered. I think that's a really great attribute to have in our modern society. That's the way, obviously there's some backwards thinking still lingers, but I just need to thank you and thanks for having me on the show.
Not a problem at all. And I will link your Invisible Injuries podcast and also your website in the show notes so that people can go and explore themselves. But I would like to finish today with asking you, what are you grateful for?
Oh, I'm grateful for having a second chance at life and finding purpose now in what we're doing. I'm grateful for having a supportive family and amazing wife and kids and friend and family network that are here. And as well as that, so I'm just really grateful that things are in a much better spot for me now and to acknowledge that growth.
Thank you for tuning in to the Talking Free podcast today. If you have an idea for a future episode or a story you'd like to share, then please message me, as I am always up for real, raw and authentic conversations. If you love what you are hearing, then please be sure to subscribe to hear all the latest episodes and spread the word to your family, friends and colleagues so they too can listen in. If you are sharing on social media, then please be sure to tag me at _Trudy _Marie _ so I can personally acknowledge you. I am always open to comment about how these episodes have resonated with you. It would also mean the world to me if you were to leave a 5-star review to ensure the Talking Free podcast is heard by more listeners around the world. And remember, lead with love as you live this one wild and precious life.